Holy Roman Emperors. Frederick Barbarossa declares his empire holy, 1155 to 1437. The Holy Roman Empire dominated Western Europe for 1,000 years. At various points, it encompassed all of modern-day Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria, Slovenia, and Czechia, as well as large parts of France, Spain, Italy, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. The empire was ever evolving geographically, politically, religiously, and culturally, and the title of emperor and who got to have it mutated from century to century. In this 5-part series, we'll meet each of the people who wore the imperial crown, and through them better understand the complex and fascinating history of the empire at the heart of Western Europe. After Frankish inheritance laws split Charlemagne's domain up between his many descendants, the Saxons took over, and Otto the Great and his successors rebuilt the empire around a shared German identity. But they still had to grovel to the Pope in order to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor. The balance of power began to shift during the reign of Frederick Barbarossa. As a young man, he marched off on crusade shortly after inheriting the Duchy of Swabia. He was second in command to King Conrad III of Germany, and, save for a priest, was the only one at the king's bedside when he died. He claimed that Conrad had given him the imperial insignia and wanted him to rule rather than Conrad's own 6-year-old son. While the prince-electors may have been suspicious of this, Frederick was incredibly charismatic and persuaded them to elect him King of Germany. It also helped that his mother and father were both scions of the two most powerful noble families of Germany. After 25 years under weak rulers, the German throne came with very little power and no revenue. The area was run by a patchwork of some 1,600 competing princes. Rather than use blunt force to reshape the empire, Frederick relied on his wits and charm. He was tall, handsome, and popular, and he was a shrewd leader. He issued an order for peace among the many fighting nobles and made lavish concessions to win them over. He promoted economic growth and founded mints to stamp coins with his face. He established a Justinian code of law based on rationality, and he promoted a new profession to administer his laws, the lawyer. Under Frederick's steady hand, Germany flourished, and his people saw him as a superhuman king. Meanwhile, in Rome, Pope Eugene III, humiliated by the failure of the Second Crusade, had been kicked out of Rome by its citizens, who demanded that the church renounce its many worldly possessions. Frederick agreed to ride to the Pope's aid in exchange for being crowned emperor. He beat back the pontiff's enemies, but before he could claim his imperial crown, Pope Eugene died and a new pope, Adrian IV, was elected. Adrian agreed to go ahead with the coronation, but when the pair met, Frederick refused to bow before the pope, kiss his feet, and carry his spurs. Offended, Adrian stormed off in a huff. After tense negotiations, Frederick agreed to perform the rituals of subjugation, but he muttered, "Pro Petro, non Adriano," for St. Peter, not Adrian. The next day, Adrian crowned Frederick Holy Roman Emperor. But Romans rioted, and rather than spending his coronation day feasting, Frederick spent it putting down the rebellion, during which over 1,000 people were killed. After a year in Italy, the emperor returned to a Germany once again in disarray. He managed to regain control, but Italy continued to be a thorn in his side. Successive popes demanded that he ride south again to defeat their enemies for them, even threatening to revoke his title of emperor if he did not. Frederick made a total of 6 military expeditions to Italy, often at the cost of order in Germany. It was there that he gained his nickname, Barbarossa, which means red beard in Italian. Frederick finally grew tired of serving as the Pope's personal security service, so he decreed that his empire was intrinsically holy and blessed directly by God, eliminating the need for a blessing from an earthly pontiff. He also gave himself the right to appoint and dismiss members of the clergy within his own domain. At the age of 65, Frederick received a letter from Christians in the Holy Land begging for his help. He took the cross and headed east with his people cheering him on. While traveling through Turkey, the emperor drowned in the Salif River. It is not clear how he died. Some claim he went out for a relaxing swim and never returned. Others that he was riding his horse across the river and suffered a stroke, or simply fell out of the saddle. And as he was wearing full armor, he was weighted down and unable to escape the shallow water. Most of his army deserted the campaign and returned home. Those who remained tried to preserve Frederick's body in vinegar in order to carry it on to Jerusalem. But this early attempt at embalming did not go well. The king's flesh was buried in Antioch, his bones in Tyre and his heart in Tarsus. Legends grew that the hero emperor was not dead, but only sleeping in a mountain, and that one day he would rise and restore Germany to its ancient greatness. Henry VI. Frederick had his son elected King of the Romans at age 4 to ensure the establishment of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. Henry was highly educated and enjoyed writing poetry. When he was 20, he married 30-year-old Constance of Sicily. She had been kept in a convent because of a prophecy that her child would someday be the downfall of Sicily. But as the only legitimate heir to the King of Sicily, she was a hot commodity on the royal marriage market. The union would have added Sicily to the Holy Roman Empire, but Constance's nephew claimed the throne for himself. Henry and Constance laid siege to Sicily, but they were forced to give up the fight when an epidemic swept through their troops. Constance was captured by her nephew, who released her on the condition that Henry recognize his rule. While in Italy, Henry stopped by Rome to get an imperial coronation. But after the tension between his father and the papacy, Pope Celestine III humiliated him by crowning him with his feet. In 1193, Henry captured King Richard I of England, who had been traveling alone and unprotected on his way home from the Third Crusade. He held the king for ransom for 150,000 silver marks, nearly 8 years of English tax revenue. Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, paid the hefty sum to secure her son's release. With his pockets bulging, Emperor Henry made another bid to conquer Sicily, and this time he succeeded and placed Constance on the throne. The queen gave birth to her only child when she was 40, almost unheard of in the Middle Ages. In order to leave no doubt that her son Frederick was the legitimate heir, Constance gave birth and breastfed in the middle of the town square, in front of a crowd of onlookers. Emperor Henry next flexed his wealthy army by threatening to invade the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Alexios III Anglos paid him a hefty ransom to cancel the invasion, and Cyprus and Armenia were both added to Henry's empire. Henry took the cross and pledged to go on crusade, but before he set off, he died of illness at the age of 32. As his son Frederick was still an infant, the empire was plunged into chaos and dispute for the next 17 years. until the great-grandson of Emperor Lothair II was elected. Otto IV grew up at the court of his maternal grandparents, King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, where he was created Earl of York and Duke of Aquitaine. His uncle Richard I tried to place him on the Scottish throne by marrying him to Margaret of Scotland, daughter of King William the Lion. But before the matrimonial negotiations were complete, William's wife gave birth to a son, knocking Margaret back in the succession. When Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI died, the German prince-electors in the south elected his brother Philip, but the northern princes rallied behind Otto and elected him as a rival king. Civil war raged for 10 years until Philip was murdered by a German duke, to whom he had refused to give one of his daughters in marriage. Otto thus became the sole king of the Romans. Previous Holy Roman emperors had used the eagle, the ancient symbol of the Roman Empire, in their heraldry. But Otto adapted this to a double-headed eagle, which represented both the east and the west of his vast empire. The double-headed eagle eventually became the symbol of all Holy Roman emperors. Pope Innocent III agreed to back Otto and crown him emperor on the condition that he not try to claim territories in Italy, especially Sicily, where Emperor Henry VI's son Frederick had recently been crowned king. He agreed for a while. But while he was on the peninsula picking up his crown, he went back on his word and invaded Sicily. In response, the Pope excommunicated him. But Otto went ahead with his conquest of the rest of southern Italy. The German princes were outraged at this betrayal. They met and declared Otto deposed and invited Frederick to take the throne instead. Otto raced back to Germany, and in an attempt to regain the nobles' support, he married King Philip's 14-year-old daughter, Beatrix. But she died just 3 weeks after the wedding. Desperate to regain the crown, Otto invaded France, which supported Frederick. But he was defeated in battle, and the last of his supporters deserted him. Deposed, Otto returned to his family lands in Brunswick. 3 years later, he was dying of disease at the age of 43. As he was still excommunicated, he believed that he would be damned to hell. Otto requested that he be mortally expiated in atonement for his sins, in the hope that he might gain salvation. He lay on the floor of the cathedral while the abbot recited his lengthy list of sins, and the reluctant priests beat him to death. Frederick II was raised in Sicily by his mother Constance. She died when he was 5, and she appointed Pope Innocent III as his guardian and regent of Sicily. During his minority, the kingdom was in a state of anarchy. At 15, Frederick married 30-year-old Constance of Aragon, who provided him with an army to get his realm under control. When the German princes deposed Emperor Otto IV, they offered the crown to Frederick, thus consolidating lands in Germany and Italy. He was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope alongside King Louis IX of France, in exchange for a vow that he would go on a crusade. Frederick was an energetic ruler, much like his grandfather and father. He was highly educated, spoke 6 languages, and was an avid patron of science and the arts, especially poetry. He founded the University of Naples, the world's oldest state university. He codified his legal system and outlawed trial by ordeal, in which the guilt or innocence of the accused was determined by combat or by subjecting them to physical torture, including burning or being thrown into a river. It was believed that God would save the innocent. Frederick considered these practices superstitious. While he was busy making positive changes in his empire, the Pope continued to remind him of his vow to go on crusade. The Pope set up a betrothal between the widowed emperor and Isabella II, who was Queen of Jerusalem in her own right. Frederick was all set to march east, see his new kingdom, and reclaim the Holy Land for Christendom, when plague broke out among his soldiers. Tired of his excuses, the Pope excommunicated him. Once the plague died down, Frederick did go to Jerusalem, where he was crowned king in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site where Jesus was crucified. This coronation had a big impact on Frederick, who began to see himself as a Messiah and even a second Christ. Upon returning home, he had to deal with an invasion by the Pope and the rebellion of his son, Henry, whom he had left in charge during the Crusade. He defeated his son, who died in prison at the age of 30. Isabella of Jerusalem died, and the emperor married Isabella of England, the daughter of King John. When she died in childbirth, he married his longtime mistress, Italian noblewoman Bianca Lancia. Frederick had 10 legitimate children by his 4 wives, and at least 9 illegitimate children. He placed his sons in various positions of power throughout his empire. Frederick's later reign was dominated by war with the Lombard League in northern Italy, and with the Pope, who excommunicated and absolved him a further 3 times. Frederick responded by tightening control over the church in his own domain and putting religious surveillance on his people to make sure that they were the kind of Christians he thought they should be. He criticized the church for being power and money hungry and called for them to return to their vows of poverty. The Pope vilified the emperor and labeled him as the Antichrist. The rivals went head-to-head for over a decade until Frederick died suddenly at the age of 55. His many descendants carried on his quarrels with the papacy, and within 22 years, all of them were dead. Frederick's dynasty died in the fight, and while kings of Germany were still elected, there was no Holy Roman Emperor for 62 years. Henry VII was elected to the kingship partly because his family was weak, but also because he was well-educated, courtly, pious, kind, and likable. He made peace with the Pope and agreed to kiss his feet in exchange for being crowned Holy Roman Emperor. Henry raised his family home of Luxembourg from a county to a duchy and appointed his son Duke. He traveled to Italy to pacify the various warring factions and was hailed as the King of Peace by the Italian people, including poet Dante Alighieri, who wrote in the Paradiso section of the Divine Comedy of the glorious throne which awaited the emperor in heaven, though Henry's modes of warfare were more brutal than peaceful. While attempting to free Rome from Neapolitan occupation, Henry caught malaria and went to his heavenly throne at the age of 40. Electors lined up behind 2 rival kings, Frederick the Fair of the rising house of Habsburg and Louis IV, the Duke of Bavaria. The cousins went to war, and Louis defeated Frederick in battle. The Pope had backed Frederick, and he excommunicated Louis after his victory. So Louis appointed an anti-pope to crown him Holy Roman Emperor. He played at dynasty building by handing lands to his sons and Holland to his wife Margaret, thus infuriating the other noble families who banded together against him. The empire was poised for civil war when Louis died of a stroke during a bear hunt. The princes next elected the grandson of popular Emperor Henry VII, Charles IV, who had been educated at the French court and was well-versed in the ways of knighthood. He fought on the French side against the English in the First Battle of the 100 Years' War. His former tutor was elected Pope Clement VI, and he maneuvered to get his pupil elected King of the Romans. He then crowned him Holy Roman Emperor. Charles bristled with the limited power of the imperial title and tried to place his sons in ever greater positions of power. He inherited Bohemia from his maternal uncle and spent much of his time in Prague, where he revitalized culture. He patronized art and scholarship, established the University of Prague, and built Karlstein Castle and the Charles Bridge. He married 4 times and fathered 8 children. His daughters made important dynastic marriages, including Anne, who was wed to King Richard II of England. Charles died at the age of 62, and the imperial throne remained empty for 55 years. But his dynastic ambitions were eventually realized when his son, Sigismund, was crowned Holy Roman Emperor. As a young man, he had married Queen Mary of Hungary, and he took control of her kingdom. He fought to defend Hungary from the Ottoman Empire, which dealt him a shattering blow at the Battle of Nicopolis. He founded the chivalric Order of the Dragon to continue his fight against the Turks, of which Vlad the Impaler, also known as Dracula, would be a famously bloodthirsty member. When Queen Mary died, Sigismund continued to occupy her Hungarian and Croatian thrones. He secured his father's former thrones of Germany and Bohemia, but he wanted his father's title of Holy Roman Emperor too, and was ruthless in his quest to win it. He taxed the Hungarian people to starvation to fund his bid to become emperor, and they resented him bitterly. Sigismund decided to prove his devotion to the church by fixing its biggest problem. For the previous 39 years, there had been 2 rival popes, one in Rome and one in Avignon, France. The emperor called the Council of Constance to heal the Western Schism. His plan succeeded in unifying the church under a single pope in Rome. But Sigismund had guaranteed the safety of Bohemian religious reformer Jan Hus, a key predecessor to Protestantism, while he presented his views to the council. The assembly ordered Hus burned at the stake as a heretic, breaking Sigismund's promise. The emperor was thus hated in Bohemia, where Catholics and reformers fought for the next 20 years. For healing the church, Sigismund was finally crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 1433 at the age of 65. But he only got to enjoy his imperial crown for 4 years, which were plagued by resentment and fighting among his people. He died at 69. In the next episode, we'll see a single family, the Habsburgs, build a dynasty that would dominate the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, the Netherlands, and much of the Western Hemisphere, and see how their obsession with keeping their land power and genetic mutations in the family would ultimately be their downfall. Don't want to wait to see the rest of this series? Patrons get exclusive early access to all 5 parts now. If you would like to become a patron and help me make more fascinating history videos, check out the link in the description. Thank you for watching.